Hello YouTube, this is Galway Yu-Gi-Oh! And I'm here with a new deck video. This time it's not a deck profile. Sadly, I do not have all of the cards in this deck to show that off, and I don't want to use proxies, but I am pretty close to having most of them, I think. I'm missing about 3 or 4 of the cards. Thankfully I got most of them to sneak peek, and actually I didn't know about this deck before today's sneak peek, and wow, I think it's pretty interesting. I don't think it's great, don't get me wrong, I don't think it's going to do anything to the meta. I just think it's a cool deck, and actually could get some rogue tops. I think it's one of those rogue decks that kind of is on the level of, say, Satellar Knights almost, because of some of the powerful effects they have. But let's get straight into it. So obviously the deck I'm talking about is Amorphages. That should be on the title of the video, and it should be very clear from the cards I've here. I'm playing Dueling Network with the images, however some of the images are still missing because the card database has not been updated with any new releases, even though it still has all of the old ones. Okay, so first off, you got Amorphages Psycho, the Vayne Drac Overlord, and this is not I wouldn't say the boss monster of the deck. This is kind of a strange card for this deck, because it has no kind of bearing with the rest of the deck. It's like a subtle kind of weak tie-in to the Drac Overlord theme that you can see in the artwork for the monsters, but not very synergetic with the deck other than this card. You can ritual summon this card with Persona. If Persona is the field spell, Persona is right here. I'll just bring that up for you right now. And by the way, Persona has a lot of effects. The effect to summon this guy is probably the weakest of them all. The least used one of them all, so to speak. But his effect, we'll go into that first. So when it's ritual summoned by tributing monsters equal to level 8 from your hand or field, you can skip your opponent's next main phase 1. It's only the first main phase 1 they have after this card is ritual summoned. Good effect. Not great, not the worst, but it's a good effect in itself. The next part is actually quite good as well, but not great, but good. And negate the effect to face up fusion, synchro, and exceed monsters on the field. So pretty much the usual way that your opponent will out a big monster with 2,950 attack when they can't enter their battle phase, because, well, obviously they can enter the battle phase, but since you're skipping their main phase 1, they'll have nothing on the field for their battle phase, most likely. So that means they're straight into main phase 2 to make a play, and usually that play will be like make Silent Honor Arc to out their big monster. They cannot do that because this card negates face up, exceeds, also fusions and synchros. So it actually is quite a good effect and can really hurt your opponent, considering the rest of this deck, how hard it is to mount a defense or an assault against this deck, I should say. It's very defensive, and when it does die, when it is sent to the graveyard from your field, he does float. He floats by adding a Drac Overlord into your hand, and you might go, well, what? I thought this was a Morphe. Yeah, it's kind of like a weird tie-in with the Drac Overlord deck. Unfortunately, it's not a very good one, because adding a Drac Overlord that's not too good in this deck anyways. I mean, it could be a scale, but I don't know. It's okay. I want to say it's okay. Unfortunately, Rector, who is probably the better of the two targets because he has a better on-field effect, he actually has an on-field effect. His scale effect is about the same, I think. It's kind of up to the situation, but he's a good scale effect too. The problem is he's scale 5, and all of the Amorphage scale 5s are good, and all of the Amorphage scale 3s, bar 1 is quite good, but bar 1 are quite weak, so you kind of prefer scale 3, and Vector actually is a scale 3, even though he's probably a weaker card outside of his scale. So if you want to run one of these, or 2 of these, if you want to run 2 of this guy, I recommend running 2 of the Ritual Monster, or 1 of them. I wouldn't run 0, just because it's nice to have that powerhouse option, you know. And I wouldn't run 3, of course, that would be bricky as all hell. Probably 1 or 2, and depending on the number of this you run, you'd run the corresponding number of this. I wouldn't run 2 of this just so you can make this live in case you draw one of your Rectors. Just not worth it. However, if you wanted to, you could run Draco Face Off, perfectly viable, and run 1 of each of these. 1 Vector, 1 Rector, and then run a Luster, which you should be running in this deck anyway. It's quite good in this deck. Simply because it does kind of fill up your Pendulum Zone, or your extra deck. But other than that, sorry, without going on a tangent, you could run maybe Master as well and run a Draco Face Off. It's a cool little mini engine. I wouldn't recommend it per se, but you could do that. It's not bad, it's not good, and obviously I haven't done too much testing with this deck yet, just reading through the cards, you know. So next up is Persona, which is the field spell, and I think kind of like, not the core of the deck, honestly, but something that makes the deck viable, because without this card, you're kind of running at a loss every turn. And what its effect is, besides boosting your Amorphages by 300 attack and defense, which is super good, by the way, because a lot of them have 1650 and 1750 attack, and kind of attacks in that kind of area, and boosting those up to 2050 and 1950 kind of helps you get over the standard level 4 monsters in the game, you know. It's quite good, as well as the various other boosts that this deck has from its face-up continuous spell and trap cards. But the main reason you run this card is twice per turn, each time an Amorphage monster is tributed, you draw a card. This is huge because all of the pendulum scale effects read during your standby phase, tribute a monster you control or destroy this card. And 90% of the time, I can guarantee you this, it's going to be you tributing an Amorphage monster that you pendulum summoned last turn to create a kind of lock. So you tribute those and generate so much advantage every turn through this card. You draw 2 cards, one for every tribute off both scales. Scale 1, tribute, draw a card. Scale 2, tribute, draw a card. Amazing. And then it has another effect. You can banish this card from your graveyard, tribute summon, or tribute pendulum monsters from your hand or field to summon this other Psycho Vayne Drac Overlord guy. So that's where it ties in. So generally quite a great card. The best effect by far is the twice per turn, you know, draw a card when you tribute. The other 2 effects are okay. Like the boost is quite significant in all things considered. And the summoning of this kind of semi-boss monster is hella useful too. Next up we got the continuous spell card, Infection. Infection is probably one of the other really good cards that hold this deck together, and it pretty much boosts your Amorphage monsters by every Amorphage card on the field. So this counts as 100, the field spell counts as 100, you have 200 right there. Now you have a monster on the field, of course, that's what it implies, so you have 300 right there, and both scales is 200, 100 for each. That's 500 attack boosted just by having your standard setup, not an exceptional setup, your standard setup. So if you consider already off these 2 cards, your monster is going to have 800 attack. Now if we take the standard level 4 one of these guys, I'll look for one now. Let's find okay, this Orga guy, he's 1650 with 800 attack, that goes up to 2450. He's quite a strong monster just based on having a standard setup, you know what I mean? Quite powerful. However, the main reason Infection is good is because if a monster on your side, in your hand or side of the field, is tributed, destroyed by battle, or destroyed by a card effect, you can add an Amorphage card from your deck to hand. So it can search the field spell, it can search itself, it can search the trap, it can search any monster. It can't actually search this Vector guy because he's not an Amorphage, he's an Amor Factor, unfortunately, which is a weird kind of difference. I don't know why, but perhaps they didn't want you to search him. I don't get why they wouldn't, because he's honestly not so powerful that he'd break the deck if he was searchable. But yeah, so it's a pretty broken card. Obviously every turn something's going to be destroyed or tributed just by virtue of the fact you have scales that exist. And you can only use it once per turn, so you can't stack them. But you still run a high count, at least 2 to 3, simply because you want to see it. Next up we'll do the trap. I'll go into the monsters because they're all very similar. Monsters on the field, except Amorphage monsters, lose 100 attack and defense for each Amorphage card in the field. So that means your opponent's monsters, not your monsters, because your monsters are all Amorphages, will lose about 500 attack. It's 100 per each Amorphage on your field, but if you have the, as I said, standard setup, it'll actually be 500 they'll be losing. Which, if you consider it, if you have this on the field, this on the field, this on the field, 2 scales and just 1 monster, you'll often have 2 to 3 monsters because you'll be building up your pendulum monsters from your extra deck. But in a standard like situation where you just say have 1 monster or 2 monsters, that's going to be them losing 700 attack on all their monsters, and defense, by the way, and you gaining 1000 attack and defense on all your monsters. It's massive. It is huge having a standard setup, and I've used that phrase quite a lot, but this deck, if it doesn't have a standard setup, is already lost, because it really needs to have both scales and a field to tribute off every turn, or else it will just start destroying its own scales, and all the times the good scales can't be pendulum summoned back. So we're going to go on to the scale 5s now. First off, I want to mention the monster effects of all 8 of these monsters that are currently out. they read, neither player can special summon monsters from the extra deck except Amorphage monsters. It's pretty much domain of the True Monarch as a monster effect. However, I will bring up one thing. There's 2 of these monsters that have this effect straight up, and they're Iritum, which is the level 8 dragon, and Nothrotes, I think he's actually called Sloth in the TCG, who's the level 6 monster. Every other one has the exact same effect, except they need to have been pendulum summoned or flip summoned in order to apply their effect. The other 2, the big ones, just have to be summoned in any way, shape, or form. You know, that's good, because you can't actually pendulum summon either of the 2 bigger ones because of the fact that your maximum scale is 5. This is a scale 3 to 5 deck, so yeah. But I'll get onto the high scales. I'm going to bring them all up here if I can find them. This is a 3, this is a 5, this is a 5, and this is a 5. So these are the 4 5 scales. And first off, we've got Iritum, the big dragon guy, and he can, as I said, get his effect even when he's not special summoned. But his scale effect I'm going to talk about. So the first part, which I've already mentioned, is during each of your standby phases, destroy this card unless you tribute 1 monster. Pretty standard, they all have that. And while you control an Amorphage monster, any card sent to the graveyard are banished instead except a Amorphage card. So it's pretty much Macrocosmos on legs for your opponent. He's pretty much Dark Claw on your scale, without the obviously banish from the hand effect. But I mean, for all intents and purposes, he's a Macrocosmos on your scale for your opponent. Of course, you do have to control an Amorphage monster in order for his effect to apply. I think this applies for every one of these scales. But he's quite a good scale, very good scale actually. And actually, every single one of these 5 scales are amazing. Not Envy as much, which is this guy, but the other 3, excellent. Macrocosmos, and I'll talk about the other 2 later. Now this guy's called Cavum, or in the TCG he's known as Envy. He's level 4, which is something to know because he can be pendulum summoned, which is fantastic. He's got 0 attack, 2050 defense, so he's okay in that regard. His effect is your opponent cannot respond to your effects. It's not actually his effect. His scale effect is while you control a Amorphage monster, neither player can chain 2 activations, which is pretty much your opponent cannot respond to effect. Very good effect. Not as good as the other 3 5 scales, I would argue. The other 2 5 scales are both level 2, which sucks, means they can't be pendulum summoned, but they are very powerful scale effects, and one of them is while you control an Amorphage monster, neither player can activate monsters effects except Amorphage monsters. This one is Gluttony, I believe, or Gastromargia in the OCG. So it pretty much stops monsters effect. Amazing. Neither player can activate monsters effect. So it's actually Majesty's Fiend in your scale. You see, this is super powerful now, right? It's super powerful. And Luxuria, who I think is is a Pride. Wait 1 second. I don't know. I think in the TCG it's called Leckery or something. Actually, I have one, but my cards are way over there on the bed. I ain't getting that shit. But it's the same thing, except they can't activate spells. Fucking broken. I can't believe how strong some of these scales are. I wish the deck was super consistent, because otherwise this would be broken. I mean, I'm glad it's not super consistent. This stops monsters, this stops spells. Both level 2, cannot be pendulum summoned. Both got really bad stats, but they'll never be on your field outside of your scale anyways. So that's it for the 5 scales. As you can see, 4 quite powerful effects. The 3 most powerful ones, which are just a step above Envy right here, however, cannot be pendulum summoned because of the fact that they're not between 3 and 5, so they're not level 4. Now let's get on to the 3 scales, which actually 3 of them are level 4 and 1 of them is level 6, so these ones are the ones that are getting pendulum summoned. So if I can bring them all up here, that would be great. Just trying to find, okay, there we are. Okay, so quickly, the first one is level 6, Nothrotes. I think this is Sloth, and he's Mistake on your pendulum scale. The same conditions as all of the other ones, except he's Mistake. That's all I need to say, really. So you can't add cards from your deck to your hand except by drawing them. The problem with this monster, of course, is these 6. So and actually he's the best 3 scale too. He's got the best 3 scale effect. So usually it'll be this guy in your scale with either Gluttony or Leckery. which stops spells or monsters respectively. However, he cannot be pendulum summoned. So it seems like there's a trend here. The best ones of the scales are shit as monsters because they cannot be pendulum summoned and they've bad stats. Okay, so we've got past that. Now the next 3 monsters all have shit pendulum effects. At best, they're average. One of them is okay in one match, but the best they're average. So this is Orga, who I've no idea what he is in the TCG. And he stops tributing, so he's pretty much massively restricting your scale. Good, if you think about it. However, you gotta consider that Monarchs are only one deck out of 3 or 4 or 5 decks that you'll be playing in a meta. Probably one of the better ones, of course. However, this deck has no issues beating Monarchs anyways. It seems overkill for this guy. But he is level 4, so you do want him in your deck. Neither player contributes summon. It's situational as hell. Not a very good scale overall, but good against the Monarch match, and even the mirror match actually, but you're not going to see a mirror match very often. Then you prefer, I don't even want to pronounce that, guys, and he stops you from taking effect damage. Again, I'm kind of wondering what the hell this is useful for. This is an awful scale effect. Sure, against Burn it will win the match automatically, but when are you going to be playing Burn? Like, in an actual event? You know what I mean? It's kind of situational as hell and not very useful. But he's a level 4 and a 3 scale, and the 3 scales are more important since there's less good ones of them. And last, this one stops traps, and like again, I'm kind of wondering. It's not that traps aren't existent in the meta, it's just that they're not very common at all. Do you know what I mean? Cosmo plays a couple of them, but not many of them. Monarch doesn't really play any except for Prime, and you usually don't use that as a trap anyways. Pepe might search one off Ariadne, but seriously, you're going to win that matchup anyways if you can just resolve any freaking Amorphage on the field to get their effects going. Really, there's just generally no reason to really have these in your scales because they're just all awful effects. However, they all are level 4, so you do need to play a high count of these just so you can actually use the on-field domain of the true Monarch effect, and also so you can have monsters to tribute every turn that you can pendulum summon back. So you need to run a healthy dose of these. Of course, this Sloth guy has a really good effect for the 3 scales. Can't be pendulum summoned, however. So in the ideal world, you'll have any of these 3 cards in your scales. Obviously Sloth has to be one of them, but you can mix around with Gluttony and Lechery for the other scale, or you could even put Irtam in, who's the big dragon guy, because he is the Macrocosmos. So as you can see, very powerful stun effects in the scale, very powerful monster effect, stopping your opponent from pendulum summoning, and a great advantage engine through 3 continuous cards, 1 a field spell, 1 a continuous spell, and 1 a continuous trap. You have an interesting boss monster who's not great. What I think this deck screams of is broken ass inconsistency, and by that I mean this deck is super powerful. It can just kick ass all of the time, but it's not going to kick ass all of the time because you ain't going to draw this good very often at all, especially with such shitty scales like these guys here, and such weak monsters like these guys here. Do you know what I mean? You got that mix where it's either a good scale or a good monster, but never both. Envy might be the exception, but he's kind of the bit of averageness for both, since he has 0 attack for a monster. He ain't going to be defending shit. And his pendulum effect is kind of as well. It's good compared to these shitties, but it's better than, like, it's not as good as the other 5 scales. So yeah, guys, I kind of hope you enjoyed this video. It's a bit different from my usual format of having the cards in front of me. I actually have most of this deck. I'm actually missing the Sloth guy, who's a secret. I'd run 2 of this guy probably. I don't think he's worth a 3 just because he's kind of a dead draw, and even though his pendulum effect is the business, you have a lot of 3 skills anyways, because you have to run them for your pendulum summoning. I have actually most of these cards already, but yeah, guys, I hope you enjoyed this formative video. Thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it was informative for Formages. If you wanted to build them, I recommend doing so. They're actually not that expensive, very, very fun, and I hope you tune in, or not tune in, but check me out next time. In a couple of weeks I might have the actual deck in front of you and I can show off a deck profile. Yeah, guys, peace out.